Many camera companies have tried to duplicate that vintage film feel in their digital cameras.
But could it get much better than this? Or this?
Probably not, but if I were to ask you which camera company do you think does it best, you'd probably have two answers: Leica and Fuji.
I mean, it makes sense because both of those cameras have a lifelong history of making amazing film cameras.
But what if I told you you were sleeping on a camera that honestly does just as well as the others and it's full frame? Yeah, I'm talking about the Nikon Zf.
Yeah, Nikon.
And in spite of all the memes, I feel like they've done a really good job with this camera, but to be sure, we have to put it to the test. And so in today's video, we're gonna look at photos, I'm gonna talk about the build quality, and then ultimately I'm gonna break it down next to two cameras that I feel like it shares a lot of similarities with: the Fuji X-T5 and the X100V.
My name is Andrew. Welcome to the Lens Journal's channel.
All right, let's play with some cameras. So Nikon went all out, making this thing as film-like as possible, but let's take a closer look and really examine that by comparing it to a few older Nikon film cameras. There are a few features that stand out to me as filmic, like the dials on top, the manual controls, things like that. Very nice, and the form factor feels very old school. But looking at these old film cameras, I've got to be honest, I don't really feel like the new Nikon Zf is that film-like. And if anything, it actually reminds me of another set of cameras. Why does this look exactly like a Fuji camera? It's so weird. It's like Nikon made the full-frame Fuji camera that Fuji will never make. And that's why I'm sandwiching it in between the X100V and the X-T5. We'll dive into the comparisons here in just a little bit, because the next thing we got to look at is that image quality. Brought it into the studio, did a little photo shoot with Britt, and this thing ripped.
I shot in JPEG and RAW, but let's look at this first RAW file. You can see that it grades pretty great. I like the ZF RAW file. This camera held up really well in studio, but my favorite mode was its black and white mode. It's as simple as just flicking a switch on the camera. Now, when you shoot RAW, obviously it doesn't save that information, but you can always go ahead and add the color profile that you wanted from camera in Lightroom, just like Fujifilm. The very last thing I wanted to do was take a photo from the ZF and compare it to another full frame mirrorless camera that I like to use, the R5, and compare the quality of the images. I'm gonna go ahead and say my opinions so that you guys form your own. Do you think the ZF holds up? Drop your thoughts down in the comments.
After using this camera for a week, I have to say I stand by my word. This is the full frame, film-like digital camera that Fuji will never make. There's a bunch of reasons, I'm sure, why Fuji won't make a full frame camera, but I think the main reason is, from what they've said, is that they don't want to compete in that space, that they're happy with their APS-C sensor cameras and their medium format cameras. I do love a full frame camera though, and so to have this as an option with some very familiar and similar mechanics, I mean, it's kind of a win. So let's go ahead and look at all three cameras side by side. As I said before, the Nikon Zf is the only full frame camera out of the bunch. The X100V and the X-T5 are both crop sensored cameras, but they do have two separate sensors. One thing that Fuji does that's pretty interesting is they put the same sensor in a lot of their bodies. The X-T5 was the mark of a new sensor. The X-T4, X100V, X Pro 3, I think, all share the same sensor. It's a whole thing. One quick note about the mounts: the ZF is not an F-mount body, which is interesting because a lot of my friends have vintage F-mount glass, so they'll have to get an adapter. I think it's kind of strange. I mean, I get it, but it just may be a little bit of a frustration for people who have a lot of old F-mount glass. The resolution on the ZF is 24.5 megapixels, the X100V is 26 megapixels, and the X-T5 is 40 megapixels. So where Fuji falls short in sensor size, they make up for in megapixels. For stabilization, both the X-T5 and the ZF have their 5-axis image stabilization. The X100V does not. I do not recommend hand holding this for video. Don't do it unless you're going for a shaky look. But where the X100V does shine is that it has a built-in ND filter, which is such a random and awesome spec, and I wish more cameras did that. For mechanical continuous shooting speed, the ZF can shoot 14 frames per second. The X100V, 11 frames per second, and the X-T5 at 20 frames per second. And both cameras can shoot in 4K, up to 60 frames per second. And I just chose a standard picture profile. I believe my Fuji defaults to Eterna, and Nikon's is literally called standard. I just didn't do a lot of color grading. I didn't want to get bogged down in that. So what is the deal with the ZF? It's sick. I love it. And I just can't help but scratch my head and think, Fuji, you left this gap in your line and Nikon took advantage of it. But clearly you know what you're doing and you're not interested in filling that gap. So cool. The main question I had walking away from my time with the ZF was, is this really a callback to the film era? Or is this the closest we'll get digitally to that full film experience? I've seen a lot of people talk about it. A lot of people say that it's a return to form. But to be completely honest with you, I don't necessarily feel that way. I feel that this is just a really cool Fuji camera and a Nikon body. So if you're frustrated and you're asking yourself, all right, Andrew, what would make this more filmic? I had an idea. What if Nikon made a ZF rangefinder style camera with interchangeable lenses, full frame, but kept all the same like form factor features? If they did that, I think it would blow my mind. And I think I would not shut up about that camera if they did it, because the enjoyment of this camera as a whole was very high for me. And that's gonna do it for me in today's video. If you wanna get your hands on this camera and test it out yourself before spending your hard-earned cash, you know where to go. The link is down below, and I will see you in the next one. All right, peace.